Hello and welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know, a podcast about books and old things and old people put on by people who are not old.
It's about old people?
It's about,
ancient
relative
people.
to us,
They're not
right?
elderly.
I mean,
some of them.
If you can, they're like 2,000 years old. That's pretty old, right? That's how age works, right?
This guy's not.
Wait, actually today we are talking about someone who is, but kind of. You said we're talking about Satan, so that's like an old fellow.
He's super old.
True.
Yeah, so that's what we talk about here. My name is Thomas Magby. I'm joined as always by Mr. A.J. Hannenberg.
Me.
And Mr. Graham Donaldson.
Me.
And
Me.
Me. Dun, 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 dun.
And we're here to announce the Classical Stuff musical review coming to towns near you. No, there's no way.
Starring the classical stuff dancers.
For the YouTube, can we start dancing right now? Actually, throughout this entire video, I'll just be dancing in the background. Podcasters, awesome. You should go to YouTube to see if that's actually true. All right, I already spoiled it, but today Graham is leading the episode, and he is, in fact, 2020 has been a really hard year, looking for kind of an uplifting topic, and I think you said Satan is what we're going to be talking about.
We're going to be talking about Satan.
Yeah, great. Okay.
We're going to pick up and talk about the next sort of section of Rene Girard's book, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. So we'll do like a brief 30-second recap of what we did last time.
So it's I see as in like I view.
I view.
Not I see Satan.
I see Satan.
Like good old chilly Satan falling like lightning.
That's why he went to hell. It's too hot, too cold up there. No, I see Satan fall like lightning. But I feel like before we get started, we got to do a little shout out.
Oh, to Hillsdale College?
Yeah. So this is our shout out to you, admissions office at Hillsdale College. You are apparently our biggest fans. I hope you're going crazy at the office right now with the shout out, or you're actually probably all working from home.
Oh, that's true. But hopefully you're cheering in your individual homes.
That's right. So if you're working from home, you're my homies. My homies at home.
Yeah, they visited the campus last week and they wanted to say hi to us. And unfortunately, Graham and AJ were teaching classes, so they were stuck with
because we're too important.
Yeah, you're very important people. Anyway,
yes.
Hello Hillsdale.
Hey, Hillsdale.
Yes, meeting fans.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, so you, admissions department at Hillsdale College, thanks for all your listens. We love you guys, and accept our kids.
Yeah, to your college.
Yeah.
Not just like
not in general.
Not just like I
in
accept
polite
you.
society.
Yeah.
So Rene Girard, he was a philosopher. He wasn't a biblical scholar. He was a philosopher, and I even think like a sociologist or something at Stanford. And he wrote a book on human psychology and biblical interpretation and what Satan is. He's famous for highlighting why societies have scapegoats and what sort of role the scapegoat plays in bringing peace to society. And that's sort of what we're going to get to today.
Wow.
And so the concept that we talked about last time was this idea that human beings locate their desires in what other people have. So there's this rivalry that comes up in human society, and it usually comes just from us like copying each other, or we have this feeling in our hearts like I should want something. Well, what's my life for? What's my purpose? And you begin to fill in those blanks by what other people are doing, by what other people have. When everybody is doing something and you're not doing something, it is very rare for the person to say like, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Although those people do exist. It's more common for someone to be like, what's wrong with me that I don't want X? And so I was trying to think of like an example of how these rivalries eventually escalate into a very important concept for Rene Girard called scandals. And he comes to this word because when Jesus says, I think it's the Gospel of Luke, and he says, blessed are those who are not scandalized by me. And it's sort of like this weird concept. Like, what's Jesus mean when he says that people are blessed if they're not scandalized by Jesus? What actually is a scandal? So let's start there. What's this like? If you hear the word scandal, what do you think of?
It's like someone who does a bad thing.
It's a bad thing, but it's not just like
it's public disgrace.
Yes. So it's public,
and it's known. Yeah,
but it's
also like a very
like a public misstep, right?
Yes,
something that is. So if I'm scandalized by Jesus, I think that he is outside of society, not appropriate. Something is wrong that makes him not fit.
Does a scandal, so it can't just be an individual person. It has to be an individual person acting either in opposition to something else, like a set norm or...
Yeah, I mean, the example that comes to mind is if someone cheats on someone else, and,
Yes.
then it becomes publicly known. So it's something that happened between two people, but the knowledge about it is public.
I don't know if it's necessarily just between two people.
No,
there can be
interested in that
scandals
example.
where somebody does something terrible and it comes out, and they are the only ones responsible and the only
Sure.
ones involved.
Yeah, so the
Someone
way...
could lie to large groups of people. It could be,
Yes.
yeah.
That could be a scandal.
Yeah, sure.
So Rene Girard has this idea that when human societies begin to go sour, they begin by having individual scandals between parties, and then individual rivalries between parties, and those rivalries sort of ratchet themselves up to the point where they become scandals. And then scandals begin to be in rivalry to one another. So is this scandalous thing that's happening more or less scandalous than this scandalous thing happening?
Interesting.
And then you get these compounding scandalous things, and everything sort of ratchets up to one great point where the entire community is what he quotes Hobbes when he says the war of all against all. And so human societies in their mimetic rivalries have this mechanism that moves towards like open conflict of everybody against everybody. And so I was trying to think of like an example of how this works. And there's a couple of other elements in there that are important. So the only thing that I could think of is like two best friends who fell in love with the same girl or are wanting to date the same girl and in high school. Mm-hmm. And let's say that at the beginning, it's kind of this friendly rivalry. They say, hey, I like Tiffany and you like Tiffany. So what we're going to do is like equal playing field. You'll ask her out, I'll ask her out, and we'll see which one she wants. And then one guy does one little dirty trick where he like publicly embarrasses his friend. So Tiffany thinks he's bad. And then his buddy does something else, and it goes back and forth, right? Like, we know how that goes. That it ratchets itself up until you get to
conflict.
Until you cross some line,
right?
And then, and I think that is what he means by scandal,
right?
Is that you've got this rivalry that's ratcheted itself up to the point of, like healthy societies not existing. Everybody has gotten sucked into this thing. And you're what team are you on? So let's call them like Davey and Bucko. I don't know. I can't think of names.
Can't call them Jacob and Edward.
Fine.
Good. Yeah,
you're right.
this is good.
No, I mean
Yeah,
this
thank
is
you.
the thing. So and then you start to ask yourself the question:
Clearly
like,
Jacob.
whose
Yeah.
team are you on?
No.
Right?
Oh, sorry.
Who has acted more or less
Team
scandalous? And the objective, rational person would look at this and say, "You're all idiots."
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in it. You get sort of sucked into this thing and you become on one team or another team. And
So like AJ might be team Jacob, I might be team Edward in this conflict.
something like that.
The logical person would say he's a werewolf who is totally jacked and cannot keep his shirt on.
Oh, did we talk
because
about
it
werewolves?
gets too
I don't-
hot.
where do
Jacob
werewolves-
and Edward. Did you not make the connection?
No, I made the connection. I
Okay.
thought we were going to play the bit out further. Sorry.
Oh no. That's what obviously,
Yes.
obviously the werewolf.
Good,
Obviously,
wonderful, great, good.
I once read an article that Twilight was a Mormon allegory. Have you ever heard this?
Yeah, it's written by a Mormon.
It's written by a Mormon.
I don't know if it's
What's the
allegory.
I don't know. I don't know enough about Mormons to be able to say. Anyway,
That'll be AJ's next episode.
so yeah, if the boys are in competition for the girl, Rene Girard says eventually a couple of things happen. One, it begins to suck people into the scandal,
What sucks people into the scandal?
the rivalry.
Okay.
And sort of this competition back and forth. So what could sort of start as a healthy competition eventually, it competes basically. Yeah, you have these scandals these rivalries that escalate into scandals, and then a couple of things happen. The object of desire eventually ends up being detested by the ones who are in rivalry for one another. At some point, there's a moment where they say, "Why are we doing this? Who did this to us? We were bewitched by the beauty of Tiffany," or whatever. If we're making up characters, and you eventually get this point where the object of desire becomes the object of contempt, where maybe this object of desire was placed here to destroy us. In sort of almost like a primitivistic way of thinking about it.
Is Girard's argument that this always happens, or are there...
Not always happens,
Okay.
but when it does happen, it it sort of railroads, gets real powerful, and can become quite destructive.
Okay.
He's eventually going to say that what this mechanism is the sort of the principle of Satan. That, yeah, maybe let's sort of talk about that section, because that's helpful. When you really break it down, when he's talking about mimetic rivalry, or when he's talking about like desire, the way that I think it's helpful to think about it is, we human beings have willpower. We want things. Mm-hmm. And Girard is saying that in the universe, there's really only two schools of thought that you can align your will with. What basically God and the devil.
Oh.
And what he means by God and the devil is that the school of thought of God is that your will should be to limit your desires and to desire what God desires. So if you're going to mimic somebody, and human beings are mimicking creatures, if you're going to mimic the willpower of something, you should mimic the will of God. And this is what Jesus does when he's on earth. So this is kind of what Paul's getting at when he says, if you can't copy Jesus, copy me, because I'm copying Jesus.
Right.
So there's that principle. And then the other principle is what Satan says, and his principle is abandon yourself to your inclinations. And let me see if I can read the little quote where he says this, what Satan's kind of principle is. Girard started this by saying, he was looking at the 10 Commandments, and the one commandment was don't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's donkey, your neighbor's stuff. Basically, don't covet things.
Right.
And that commandment is like, put a cap on wanting what your neighbor has. Your desire, if left unchecked, is going to be such a destructive fire that God is commanding you not to desire. That was Girard's point. And the
can I ask then, for your example, is the problem that Edward and what's the dumb werewolf called?
Jacob.
Yeah, that Edward and Jacob both want Tiffany or Bella. Is the problem that they both want the same person?
The problem is that at some point, either the ego takes over and the object becomes secondary to the rivalry.
Got it. It's more they want to win over the other person more so than actually,
So
achieve the love of someone.
If two boys like one girl, the gentlemanly way, the honorable way to do it is to actually say, present your case to her and let her pick, and then have a good, a fair winner and a fair loser, and we can still be friends after it. And
I know of no better way to woo women than presenting a case.
You put a PowerPoint slide together, and then exactly. Is this not how romance works?
I am financially solvent.
You think Tiffany would?
Well, I drive a Volvo. It's not flashy, but it is reliable.
If Tiffany is thinking about the future, Tiffany would take these things into consideration. This is not nothing.
Sure.
Financial security is an important part of any relationship.
I feel like if one guy gives the presentation, another guy rides up and says, "Hey, can I go get some food on my motorcycle?" She'll be like, "Yes, please. I'm so tired of the PowerPoint."
Conversation. Yeah.
Well, Tiffany is losing out.
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, but the
how am I the only one not married in this group?
We get better PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, you got to get better PowerPoint. Yeah. So the way it should work is when the loser loses the girl, he should move on and be able to shake hands and say, like, that's just the way it is. But at some point, if they're going to go into a rivalry, the object of desire sort of fades into the background, or, as Girard points out, eventually even becomes an object of hatred, or blames the object for the destruction that has now happened in the community. AJ, we used to be best friends until she got in the middle of us, right? Yeah, I can't believe she did this to us. She didn't do anything to us. She just existed.
Right.
But it's that kind of, unless she was actively like playing us off each other.
She spends an hour doing her hair in the morning. She does it for a reason.
But anyway, so the two principles, you can try to mimic God, or you can try to mimic Satan. And this is where Girard says how Satan presents himself. Like Jesus, Satan seeks to have others imitate him, but not in the same fashion, not for the same reasons. He wants, first of all, to seduce. Satan as seducer is the only one of his roles that the modern world condescends to remember a bit. primarily to joke about. Satan likewise presents himself as a model for our desires, and he is certainly easier to imitate than Christ, for he counsels us to abandon ourselves to our inclinations in defiance of morality and its prohibitions. If we listen to Satan, who may sound like a very progressive and likable educator, we may feel initially that we are liberated, but this impression does not last, because Satan deprives us of everything that protects us from rivalistic imitation. Rather than warning us of the trap that awaits us, Satan makes us fall into it. He applauds the idea that prohibitions are of no use and that transgressing them contains no danger.
Wow.
So
then for our example, is Girard saying that like God is on one side, Satan's on another, or is Satan almost like the third option of the rivalry? Like, I'm just, is he trying to say that there are right sides and wrong sides in these conflicts over an object of desire, or is the rivalry itself where Satan is present?
I think it's the rivalry is where Satan is present.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe our example of the two guys both desiring the girl is a bad one. I think it's when it goes from Tiffany is no longer considered and Tiffany is no longer cared about, and it just becomes, I need to beat this guy to this thing. And you eventually locate your behavior, your action, and your very being based on the behavior and actions of your rival. Mm-hmm. And he's doing the same thing to you.
Right. It becomes a race to the bottom.
And so it becomes, and so it becomes this sort of race to the bottom. And that is that is the trap that Satan doesn't tell you you're going to fall into, and that is the trap that do not covet your neighbor's stuff is trying to prohibit you from falling into.
Okay.
So Satan says, give in to everything. You have desires and you should go for them. And little do you know that that's going to put you in opposition to everybody. And
this is reminding me of, are you guys aware of the OTO?
No.
Do you know what the OTO is?
You referenced this last time. It's like the cult of Satan or something.
Yeah,
right?
they call it the Church of Satan. It's not really, but it's the Ordo Templi Orientis, and they're one thing. It's Aleister Crowley. You ever heard of him? Aleister Crowley?
No.
Mm-mm.
He's kind of the philosopher behind the thing. And do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. And there's another podcast out there I occasionally listen to. They are skeptics of pretty much everything, and it's Ono, Ross, and Carey. And what they do is they get into things like this, anywhere there's a claim of the supernatural or pseudoscience, and they get as far in as they can. They experience it. It's kind of like gonzo journalism for the supernatural and occult. And so they went to this thing, and they pointed out that do what thou wilt as the whole of the law is fine until two people in the organization will opposing things.
Yes.
Like my will is to leave my Gatorade here and have it when I come back.
Right.
Someone else's will is to drink my Gatorade, and that's when we automatically get into this opposition. And they're like, it'll go fine if everyone just do what they wanted. Well, no, it's a really short-sighted philosophy. It's just making me giggle that you're pointing out the exact problem with the OTO.
Right.
And this is the exact problem with it, because...
And it's literally called, like, often they call it the Church of Satan, which is just the funniest thing.
And then the next step is like, okay, when the person has done what he's wanted and drank your Gatorade, you now have created a rivalry.
Yes.
And that person is going to be in and then you've created this sort of opposition with one another that eventually
has to escalate to violence, right? Isn't that the only way?
It either has to escalate. Yes, it either has to escalate to violence, or someone's the bigger man and just sort of brushes it off.
Yep.
But Girard's point is that it usually escalates into violence.
Right.
If it doesn't, it eventually will. Like that person is now a rival in your mind in the smallest way, and maybe the Gatorade doesn't rush into violence, but the next time they do something is another little tick on.
I'm not going to be leaving my Gatorade around anymore because of that guy.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, and then the next time, and then you know what? I am going to leave my Gatorade, but I'm going to hork in it. And then he finds out that you horked in the Gatorade when he drank it, and and then off we go.
Right.
Yes. So then these things escalate into what these are called scandals. And then eventually scandals are in competition with one another.
That conflict is the scandal. So in the Gatorade, it's whether you put it on the desk or not, is the scandal?
Well, the scandal is, yes, I guess the scandal is as soon as the person has taken that sort of next step into escalating it. And the scandal is when it escalates to such a point that it bleeds out into the rest of the community and everyone's like, oh my goodness, this has gone nuts.
All the OTO now knows that like AJ and Craig are at rivalries, and we're all the do what thou wilt is aimed at the other person.
Sure. And then someone's like, well, here's my big long Facebook post about how Greg is fine. And here's my big long Facebook post about how AJ is justified. And then somebody else is like, I'm staying out of it. I don't want part of this. And it's like, well, by staying out of it, you're already picking a side.
And you don't care about the community.
You don't care about the community. So, so here's the interesting point. When that person comes out and says, well, I am staying out of it, and the other person says, you don't care about the community, you've now created another rivalry. Yeah. Those who don't care about the scandal and those who do care about the scandal.
Sure.
And now you've got a second rivalry, and that's going to ratchet up. So to the point where these little things build up, and then eventually what you get is what's called the war of all against all. So you have the scandal that escalates to the point where everybody is against everybody. And something's got to give. Okay, now this is where it gets kind of really interesting. So Jesus in the Bible, Satan's got a couple of names. So how does Satan refer to? This is a Bible quiz. What are some of the names or some of the titles he gets?
The accuser.
So he gets the accuser.
Prince of Lies, I think.
Prince of Lies.
Prince of the Power of the Air.
Yeah, this is the one. Prince of the Power of the Air, or the Prince of this world.
Right.
And so Rene Girard latches onto that concept, and he's like, why is Satan called the prince of this world? A prince, indicating that he's got authority over this world. And so why does he have this name? So Girard says that at some point it gets real interesting that if this is true, these mimetic rivalries turn into, we're doing great on time. These mimetic rivalries turn into scandals, and then eventually these scandals start playing off each other, that the scandals become their own mimetic rivalries. And you get to the point where everybody is all riled up, and you have these scandals competing for public attention. If left unchecked, that will destroy the community. People will just start straight up killing each other. Or the community will rip apart to the point where, fine, we'll have OTO and the spin-off OTO or whatever, right? Or we'll have, the Methodists and the United Methodists. Right. You will have some sort of rift, but then there's going to be scandals and those things. So if Satan's principle is left, that program is left to play itself out, why hasn't humanity destroyed itself? How do we still have a culture and a community and civilization?
Mutual need.
Interesting. I was going to say law. Because at some point, so if there's a disagreement, the question is who is right. So someone has to say who is right. So we create an authority structure that says the person at the top gets to say which side. But
even then, that breaks itself down. So if the authority structure itself becomes enmeshed in scandal, then people are going to be like, well, screw you, and then you have a civil war or whatever. He eventually says what happens is there's this mechanism in this destructive, rivalistic, mimetic rivalry that ratchets up to scandal. And he says it eventually coalesces onto one universally hated subject. And that subject, all of the wrath of the community gets poured out on that subject, and that subject needs to be destroyed. And when that subject is destroyed, you have a sort of a calm, or you have a release. You've got this great release of the rage and this sort of contagion of rival emotion poured out on the subject. And when that subject is killed and destroyed, then it's almost expunged like a disease. And interestingly enough, when one side, so when the great act of violence comes, and this is where we get the terms, this is where scapegoats come from. Mm-hmm. So all of the sins of the community, or all of the rivals of the community, get put onto this one object. So how do the bros become friends again without it tearing everything apart and escalating to bloodshed? Well, they eventually both of them
reject the girl.
reject the
right?
girl.
Yeah, exactly.
Now that's a small and unviolent way that this plays itself out, and we have sort of like buddy movies built around that very what's it called? That very sort of plot point.
Mm-hmm.
But when it gets into a violent mob, you get a thing where you can have an innocent subject where all the rage gets put upon, and when that subject is killed, then both sides start imitating each other in being calm again. So there's this great release that comes in the violence, and we got it. Great, we got rid of the problem. Great job, you guys. We did it.
Wow.
And then the guy over there that doesn't feel like we did it sees that everybody else feels like they did it, and he's like, oh, I should probably feel better about this too. And then you've almost got this like, quote unquote, positive contagion. If you had a negative contagion of everybody getting ratcheted up to violence, after the violence, you get almost this like positive contagion of, we did it, you guys. We defeated the bad guy. We defeated the enemy, which was Tiffany or whatever.
Or this is when people talk about like the 1950s being this like awesome time of unity. This would say it's because we beat the Nazis.
Yeah.
And like that was our unifying moment. We could all talk to each other as, common Americans. And then,
What's wrong with the city? Well, there's a witch. We got to get rid of her.
Sure.
And as soon as we burn that witch,
We can go back to-
then we can go back to the way things were.
sure.
And so he says that that this is still Satan at work. That this is sort of Satan's pressure release valve. Is that the way that Satan keeps his power? So the only thing Satan knows how to do, the only action that Satan does, is to try to get you from following God's law and to live for your own desire. But Satan's problem is that as soon as communities start to live for their own desires, it is going to destroy them. So what Satan needs to do is then as soon as everybody's desire is to kill everybody else because everyone's sort of gotten into this state of madness, he then funnels all of that rage and hatred onto one single victim. And then when that victim is killed, there is a reset. And then the desires can go back to its base state, and then the cycle can start all over again. And so this is the idea of the scapegoat. The sudden harmony that comes out of the discord is still a mimicking. So when the crowd begins to see that others in the crowd have been satiated with the death of the innocent, they are satiated. And then the desire kind of gets, pushed down. So, and this is, I think, AJ, just because we're going to be studying this book in Senior English Next, Brave New World, I think Huxley's getting at this too with a lot of the sort of religious elements that he has woven into the Brave New World Society, that human beings can't live getting all of their needs fulfilled without some kind of pressure release, and that's why they have the orgy-porgy thing going on there. So anyway, for those of you who really like Huxley's Brave New World, that element is at play in there. But anyway, so...
Do you buy this? Do you say more about what you think about all of this?
I buy it. I buy it in the fact that like you see it happening in society. He actually goes when he begins to talk about this concept of scapegoats. He goes and he finds a story of. Well, let me just sort of read this story. He finds this book by Philostratus, a Greek writer who is in the second century. Anyway, who's after Christ, and he's this sort of guru. And so this guy named Apollonius of Tyana. So Apollonius of Tyana is this sort of guru, spiritualist, miracle man. And Ephesus has this problem. Ephesus has a plague. And so I'm going to read this little story to you. So this is coming from this book, The Life of Apollonius of Tyana. So the Ephesians could not get rid of an epidemic. They have all these remedies and nothing works, and they go to Apollonius, who says this: "Take courage, for I will today put a stop to the course of the disease." And with these words, he led the population entire to the theater, where the image of the averting god had been set up. And And there he saw what seemed an old mendicant artfully blinking his eyes as if blind. And he carried a wallet and a crust of bread in it. So there's a little poor guy just like living in the temple. And he was clad in rags and was very squalid of countenance. Apollonius therefore arranged the Ephesians around him and said, "Pick up as many stones as you can and hurl them at this enemy of the gods." Now the Ephesians wondered what he meant, and were shocked at the idea of murdering a stranger so manifestly miserable, for he was begging and praying them to take mercy upon him. Nevertheless, Apollonius insisted and egged on the Ephesians to launch themselves on him and not let him go. And as soon as some of them began to take shots and hit him with their stones, the beggar, who had seemed to blink and be blind, gave them all a sudden glance and showed that his eyes were full of fire. Then the Ephesians recognized that he was a demon, and they stoned him so thoroughly that their stones were heaped into a great cairn around him. After a little pause, Apollonius bade them remove the stones and acquaint themselves with the wild animal which they had slain. When therefore they had exposed the object which they had thought they had thrown their missiles at, they found that he had disappeared, and instead of him there was a hound who resembled in form and look a Molossian dog, but was in size the equal of the largest lion. There he lay before their eyes, pounded to a pulp by their stones, and vomiting foam as mad dogs do. Accordingly, the statue of the averting god named Hercules had been set up over the spot where the ghost was slain. So, that's a pretty rough miracle.
Does Girard question it to say essentially this was actually just a poor beggar man that...
Yeah, so Girard is saying that in that miracle, that when this happens a lot, that in the ancient world, when they talk about a plague in a city, sometimes it's bacterial, but other times it's a spiritual plague. That when something's wrong in Ephesus, it's just that, like, there's just something in the air. There's just something wrong in the community. People don't trust each other. People don't like each other. Everybody thinks everyone's out to screw them. And the gods are not blessing the community with prosperity. There's no more harmony. And that kind of thing was also called a plague in a community, that the gods were just frowning and all of our normal human actions just aren't working themselves out. That when Tiffany chose AJ, Craig just wouldn't let it go, and there's just nastiness in the air, and that's also a plague. And so Girard is saying that Apollonius is recognizing that this is what is wrong with the Ephesians, and by finding an outsider, by finding somebody that he thinks everyone could agree to dislike. And killing that outsider, that all of those angry, negative passions, that sort of that toxicity of relationship that gets built up, gets expunged, and now everybody can kind of get back to regular life, and the plague is gone. And then so the fact that there's a dog, a demon dog underneath it is just that's maybe the part of the story that's kind of like the apocryphal.
It's tacked on to make you feel better.
That's tacked on to make you feel better about it. What should make us feel better is that the Ephesians initially were like, I don't want to stone this guy. Right. But his point is that this was a thing that in the pagan world, in the ancient world, they understood, or at least the sort of like self-help community gurus understood, that it's sort of the same concept of like you needed like a communal bloodletting. Or you needed to pour out, the community needed to pour out all of their rages and frustrations on an object, and then everybody would sort of feel better. Now, ultimately, he's going to go on in the book, and we're not going to finish the book on the podcast, but ultimately he's going to go on and talk about how God subverts Satan's scapegoating by giving a scapegoat that perfectly destroys the power of Satan's mimetic desire in Christ. So by having Christ be this ultimate scapegoat, Christ's perfect sacrifice ends up destroying the power that Satan has of the world, which is to get everybody, all geeked out about their own passions to the point where they're willing to shed blood, and then shedding blood and everybody feeling okay again. But by bringing the scapegoat back to life and opening up a path for people to live without having to be stuck in this cycle of sin and desire, that actually the scapegoat ends up destroying Satan's tool for ruling the world. And so that's Girard's kind of like reading of these archetypes or reading of these stories. And I think it's really fascinating and really interesting.
Does he speak to why there is still conflict like that now? So if that tool is broken, people still get worked up. People still have scapegoats.
Yeah, but now what we should be having is we should have the church who is showcasing how the way to live without being a slave to mimetic rivalry should go. And so in the New Testament, when it talks about people lived together and held their things as if they were one, or as
you're talking about Acts 2.
Yeah,
commonly.
It's not just because like the leaders of the writers of the Gospel of Acts wanted to like leave us little socialist policies in the Bible but it's that this is sort of how the community ends up, like a community that has abandoned the quest of following their own desires and is actually following the do not covet your neighbor's stuff,
right, is
going to be a community that doesn't get their shorts in a wad over these slights of desire or these
It's interesting. Your example earlier kind of got at denominations, which is a kind of splitting of that unity that kind of started things off. It's almost a reframing of the importance of there being one in the Nicene Creed. It's the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Catholic meaning universal, not Roman Catholic.
And insofar as, if those divisions are because the divisions are moving us, so there's two takes on it, right? The divisions are either moving us back
Closer
towards
to
purity,
yep,
or those divisions are just mimetic rivalries that can't work themselves out. If they're the latter, well, that's sort of the more satanic principle. If they are the former, well, then it's almost like a healthy expunging, and the jury's out on. You have to sort of look at it by case basis
to figure out which one is which. Yeah.
Now, when Peter says to Jesus, "Hey, I want to be at your right hand when we take this thing down. Like, let's throw out the Romans." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." This is what Girard says why he calls him Satan. Peter becomes the object of this rebuke when he reacts negatively to the first prediction of the passion. So yeah, when Peter says, "You can't die, you got to throw out the Romans," disappointed by what he takes to be the excessive resignation of Jesus, the disciple tries to breathe into him his own desire, his own worldly ambition. Peter invites Jesus, in short, to take Peter himself as the model of his desire. So Jesus, you should want what I want. If Jesus were to turn away from his Father to follow Peter, he and Peter both would quickly fall into mimetic rivalry, and the venture of the kingdom of God would melt away in insignificant quarrels. So when Jesus tells Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," he's rebuking him because what he's saying to Peter is, by asking me to want what you want as opposed to what my Father wants, you are enacting the satanic principle in the world right now. That's pretty harsh.
Yeah. Because how else would you need a way to interpret that passage? What is common between Satan and what Peter's doing in that moment? It's interesting. It's just, I feel like it's something I need to think more about.
Now, and AJ, I'm going to need your help on this. So, podcast, we talked about the great man theory and Dostoevsky. And I think you can take this Girard principle of the rivalries that ratchet themselves up to the point where each individual person hates everybody else as what is going on in the epilogue in Crime and Punishment. So do you want to just give like a brief, we didn't talk about it last podcast. Do you want to give a little brief overview of Raskolnikov's dream?
Oh gosh, it's been a little while since I've read it. Do you know it better than me?
Did you teach it when you did it with your seniors? Okay, I did. So because we had a little extra time. So at the end of Crime and Punishment, when Raskolnikov, who has, if you're confused, you can listen to last week's podcast. When Raskolnikov confesses and begins his path of confession and faith and repentance, he goes to jail in Siberia, and he has this dream wherein let me just actually read a little bit of it, because it's a dream where his own terrible philosophy works itself out.
I was impressed. You like literally just open up books and flip to the right page.
Well, I teach them.
But you don't
This
like
is
mark
the
them
10th time.
Do you mark them or anything?
Yeah, I got a little star by
Oh,
it.
this makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were just like straight up opening the book to the right page.
No. So Raskolnikov, he dreamt, I'm just going to read a little passage from this. I may read the whole thing because it's so good, but he dreamt in his illness that the whole world was condemned to fall victim to a terrible unknown pestilence. So again, that like language of a contagion,
Right.
Which was moving on Europe out of the depths of Asia. All were destined to perish, except a chosen few, a very few. There had appeared a new strain of trichinae, microscopic creatures parasitic in men's bodies. But these creatures were endowed with intelligence and will. People who were infected immediately became like men possessed and out of their minds. But never had any men thought themselves so wise and so unshakable in the truth as those who were attacked. Never had they considered their judgments, their scientific deductions, or their moral convictions and creeds more infallible. Whole communities, whole cities and nations were infected and went mad. All were full of anxiety, and none could understand any other. Each thought he was the sole repository of truth, and was tormented when he looked at the others, beat his breast, wrung his hands, and wept. They did not know how or whom to judge, and could not agree what was evil and what was good. They did not know whom to condemn or whom to acquit. Men killed one another in senseless rage. They banded together against one another in great armies. But when the armies were already on the march, they began to fight among themselves. The ranks disintegrated. The soldiers fell on their neighbors. They thrust and cut. They killed and ate one another. In the towns, the toxins sounded all day long and called out all the people. But who had summoned them and why, nobody knew, and everybody was filled with alarm. The most ordinary callings were abandoned because every man put forward his own ideas, his own improvements, and there was no agreement. The laborers forsook the land. And then it goes on and it talks about how people say, we got to get back to the way things were, but they can't agree on what the way things were. And it just sort of disintegrates into this sort of great unraveling.
Does he open by? Did he say that there are some people who were immune to this?
Yeah.
come
He says
back?
that there are some people that were immune to this disease, and they were the ones who were going to survive the coming whatever.
Ultimately, all the ones who are infected kill each other.
I think he wakes up before the dream ends. Okay. But you sort of see how, when I read that passage, I think to myself, like, this is kind of what Girard's getting at.
Yes. That there's no other way of dealing with this. There's no cure to that disease, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, Girard says the cure to the disease is basically, the cure to the disease is in following Jesus. And what he means by that is instead of opening yourself up to following your desires, that's going to eventually put you in violence, you, quote, do the will of my Father. Now, what that exactly is, as far as Girard is concerned, I don't really feel like I have a good handle on. Wanting what God wants.
Yeah. Or not seeking conflict would be the specific example here, right?
Yeah.
Are you referencing something else by saying you don't know what Girard would want?
I mean, it's just he says that Jesus showcases us the way that someone should live who desires what God desires, and so when you see, basically, like, Girard would agree with the "What would Jesus do" bracelets. Right, because he'd be like, that's actually the principle you need to have is do what Jesus does, because he is someone that has control over his desires and follows the law of God. And if the law of God is set up to put guardrails on our desires so we do not fall into mimetic rivalry and ultimate destruction and death, then do what Jesus does.
Sure. Do you think this has anything to say for right now? Are there any... yeah.
I don't know. AJ, you seem lost in thought. Do you think that's fair to say that Dostoevsky's great man theory is related to this sort of it's like the satanic principle, if you want to call it that?
Well, sure. He wanted to be like other men he thought were great. I am
Yeah, and that's kind of the rivalry, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to be Napoleon, this sort of abstract person that I can just sort of lob my own desires onto.
And he thinks all other men are louses.
Yeah.
And he's wondering if he's one of those too.
Yeah.
Right? Power over the whole ant heap. He has no high opinion of his fellow man.
Yes.
What I'm wondering about is his reading of the Get Behind Me, Satan passage and his view of the Christ event as the Christ event is a really, I don't know, clinical way of saying when Jesus died, thinking of that as a scapegoat. I see where this theory is going. To me, it feels like at the risk of doing the fallacy of argument from personal incredulity, like I just don't buy it. It seems like one of those things that's logically, internally coherent, but unsatisfying as an explanation for all of human events. And here's what I mean. So the explanation of Jesus' death as the ultimate scapegoat event is okay, but I see a disconnect between the analogy you gave and Jesus, right? We're not all standing around looking at Jesus saying like, thank goodness we got rid of that screwball. He was really messing up the community.
But the crowd was.
The crowd was, but we all look at that crowd, and most of history has looked at that crowd and said, what a bunch of dinks those guys were. To us, he was a good man that was killed. And so if we're talking like, yes, Jesus was a scapegoat, but Jesus was a scapegoat for the furies of God the Father, not the community at large. So I have trouble with that. And I also have a little bit of trouble with him explaining the Get Behind Me, Satan thing there too. I personally kind of doubt that Jesus was thinking all of that terminology. Maybe, yes, he was. I think it kind of works out where it's the same. That's why I'm kind of lost in thought is Peter wanted a certain thing to happen. And the thing is I see like what Satan did to Jesus was tempt him. Like we have the temptation for 40 days. And so if what he said was like, you shouldn't die, we should go overthrow Rome, I wonder if that wasn't like almost a direct temptation to Jesus. Jesus clearly did not want to die, right? If you can take this cup from me.
We got the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, we have the Garden of Gethsemane. And so if Peter's like, hey man, forget all that death nonsense and come with me and let's overthrow Rome, Jesus could have, right? And so there's a little bit of temptation there, and I'm wondering
it's like the Grand Inquisitor all over again, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it isn't just like this fellow, Girard, kind of really shoehorning some events into a personal theory. And I get the whole...
I think that's a fair criticism.
And I think the whole like mimetic rivalry as the problem and the abandonment of passions is the Jesus way to go. But it's not just the abandonment of passion. And I think you were talking about this just now. It's the attunement of passion, right? The ordering of your loves. But that's the thing is sometimes true ordered attuned passions can lead to conflict in the community that is good conflict. And that is how you test whether or not every rivalry is a good one. If someone is doing terrible things to the poor, downtrodden, and the widow, I should, as a Christian, try to somehow fix that problem, ideally through forgiveness and absolution for the offender. But there are conflicts that might sometimes arise. And this is where when you get into the difficulty of like, should Christians always be pacifists?
Well, this is what we were even talking about with schisms, right? Sometimes that's a conflict that should arise because there's a doctrine that has been...
Precisely.
Yeah.
And so like conflicts...
Yeah, conflicts aren't ipso facto satanic. I think that's his point.
I don't think so. And my other point is that like when you asked how do communities survive, well, one of the most accepted ones is mutual need. It's not just like, woo, we got a scapegoat this time. It's like, we have to stay together.
Maybe I should have rephrased the question of how do communities survive when those rivalries get to a fever pitch? That's the point.
I mean, yeah, scapegoat, maybe. Other times life just moves on. People forget about it. Like, I can't spend all day posting on Facebook. And at some point, I have to go to my job and figure out something else. Do I need a scapegoat to make that happen? No, sometimes it just fades.
But doesn't the anger and the hatred and the toxic relationships of a community build up to a fever pitch where something's got to give? I mean, that clearly has to be... Sometimes
what gives is just people get tired of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think...
I just don't see that it always ends.
Give me an example where it was teetering on a knife edge of destruction. Everyone was like, you know what?
I think it's almost personal conflict. You don't have deep conversations every time you have a problem with someone. Right?
Sometimes you just forget. And for example, all right,
But what about when it bleeds over into the crowd? That's I think what Girard's getting.
Okay, so here it is.
Okay.
Here's one example. Way back in the ancient days of Veritas, there were a whole lot of people up in arms about what appeared to be sort of nepotism, right? There's a lot of Shoeknecks that work at this school.
Fair.
And I am related to the Shoeknecks, and so is my sister. And so they're like that's all these things. And there were some other teachers that had left, and so there was this divide between the administration and the common folk, right? And it got to kind of a fever pitch where people were demanding certain people to step down, and there were all these emails sent, and eventually a meeting was held that was just like, hey, let's chat it out.
Yeah.
And they chatted, and it ended. Like, it was over. They addressed some concerns. We had a talk. Was there a scapegoat? No, we didn't like take Jeff Fowler and boot him and say, thank heavens we got rid of that scapegoat. Sometimes we can talk things out. Sometimes we just forget. Like that conflict.
So like a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, a come to Jesus moment. Sure.
You think that makes his point?
I mean that's why we call it a come to Jesus moment.
But that's my point, is like his theory is fine, but it feels unsatisfying to me as an explanation for human experience.
Yeah.
He's answering the question of what happens if the two parties aren't reasonable and things continue to escalate. So neither party's willing to be the bigger person. Neither one's willing to listen to the other side. What ultimately happens at the end of that?
So what happens if people are only sinful, but people are
Well, he's giving an answer to, when you look at primitive religions, or when you look at the pagan world, and you see that things are centered around sacrifice, where an animal, or, heaven help us, a person, a baby, some kind of thing is determined to be the great evil that needs to be expunged, and then there's health to the community. That's a mechanism that exists in societies. And so he's trying to give an example to what is happening with those, like that sort of anthropological phenomena. What's going on there, that the blood of an innocent or the blood of an outside thing ends up bringing health to the community. And he's sort of saying, and this is his take on that.
Is this also his explanation of like the sacrificial system? Or
I think so. I mean,
but then I take huge beef with that, because part of the reason for the sacrificial system is to point forward to Jesus Christ.
I'm talking about like Greeks. I wasn't.
Like the Greek sacrificial system?
Yeah.
Sure.
Because
it's not just Hebrews that had that.
Yeah, totally. Well, even just if we're in our nitpicking point, the scapegoat for the sacrifice is the goat that gets away. It's not the goat that's killed.
Yeah.
Looking straight up at Leviticus. So Jesus isn't the scapegoat. It's Barabbas who's the scapegoat. He's the one who's released. And then Jesus is the one who's, anyway, that's
an interesting point. Yeah.
Again, he's viewing these things more allegorically than he is like, what is the actual application of Leviticus to the Christ event.
Yes,
so,
he's reading this almost in like a
he's using the
allegorically, or you even call this is almost like archetypally.
Yeah.
He's sort of saying like there is the Jesus way and there is the devil way, and these are the two, and the healthy community needs to do what AJ just described, which is to sit down and talk it out and basically put a cap on the desires that are running away from the community,
right?
And that's the healthy way. And so, I mean, I think someone who doesn't even believe that Jesus was the Son of God would read "I See Satan Fall Like Lightning" and say like, "Oh, that's a really interesting take on human psychology, using the Bible as using the story of the Bible to interpret speak into how human beings behave."
Right.
And so.
It just makes me think of...
Which is probably why he's not Saint Rene Girard.
It just makes, like, the application of this theory... I get it, that in certain... And I agree that in certain instances, this theory makes a lot of sense. But it reminds me of a quote from G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown Mysteries, that a man warmly concerned with any large theories has always a relish for applying them to any triviality, right? Right? Take any large theory like this, and it's his favorite thing to apply it anywhere.
But...
I don't know that that's what's happening. It's just what it reminds me of.
Thomas, the question you said, do you have any sort of application for this today? Not in the present moment, although I'm sure we could freak ourselves out if we did this, but that we should never... that principle that happens when, why does the witch, who is clearly innocent to the eyes of the historian looking back on her, it was like blazingly obvious that this poor child was not a witch. Why do seemingly rational people end up straight out murdering her in this kangaroo court for the health of the community? And we would be arrogant if we think that we were immune to those kinds of things today. And so, so the great outsider is always going to be, So when a community gets into a place of toxic rivalries back and forth, it should not surprise anybody when the threat of violence of all against all becomes targeted towards one
person, one group.
Yeah,
right.
It's like The Purge, right? That movie.
I brought that up last time we talked about this.
Although I think in The Purge, that's more just like a go out and kill whoever you want and get out of your system.
No
The
one
real,
target.
the Rene Girardian Purge movie would be that everybody votes on the one guy to die. Or there's that movie, that old short story, The Lottery. Do you guys know this short story?
I know the short story.
Where everybody gets together and like, oh, today's the day of the lottery, and who's gonna win the lottery? And the person who wins the lottery, the community stones them to death.
Wow.
And then the community goes back to being like healthy again. So if I'm remembering the story correctly,
yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
So it's that kind of thing, right? That that communities ritualistically enact unjust violence for the sort of psychic spiritual health of the community. And as far as Girard is concerned, the death of Christ frees us from having to do that as a community.
Sure.
That there is a way to come together and to sort of reorient our desires, as opposed to having to have the sort of contagious wrath fall on the milky white head of an innocent or whatever. No?
I'm with you. I agree with a lot of that. But the example you brought up of the clearly innocent witch, according to the historian, well, that only functions if the historian is not being himself arrogant and she was truly innocent. It's easier for us to look back.
If she actually was a witch, she was like,
well, that's the thing. Like, I'm going to
little
reveal a little bit of my mysticism here. But if I am a Christian, I believe in demonic forces.
Sure.
And if there are demonic forces, then witches may exist. And a lot of people I've talked to have had run-ins with things like that. And at the very least, there are these suspicions in communities not American. And so, like, things like that. If there really is someone trying to work magic on
so
the
like the
people around them in their
Crucible,
community,
you're 2 thumbs up, and
I'm just saying, like, it's easy
like a
for us
story,
to
though.
look back and take
Yeah.
modern sensibilities and foist them on people who like, you are assuming that you are smarter than the entire Puritan community
Fair.
that did that, and
that's
that
right.
seems hubristic to me.
I haven't seen. Did you watch the movie The Witch?
Yes, I did.
Is there? I mean, I haven't watched it, but I've read enough about it to know the whole plot of it. I think it would just freak the crap out of me if I watched it. But
It's kind of goofy in spots.
But it seems like it's kind of got this, like, the satanic element is at play in that movie too, right? Like the taking on the father is too proud, and he develops this rivalistic animosity with the community, and he eventually has to like go off by himself into the woods, and it's that sort of pride and arrogance of not being told how to live that is the seed of his family's destruction, right?
It's also that the goat is literally Satan.
Well, yeah.
That is also a seed of destruction, I think.
Spoiler.
Not just the dad.
Yeah. Anyway, I haven't seen it, so I can't speak too much
Like,
about it.
I would be like, yeah, the dad was partially at fault, but also Satan goat.
goat, yeah.
It seems to be a large force at work.
Anyway, so that's Rene Girard. I don't think we're going to do a third parter, even though we're only like...
What? How many chapters are in the book? Or how much of the book have we covered?
We've probably covered a third of it.
Oh, really? Okay.
And the rest of the book is where he sort of builds up. Well, where he builds up his rationality of the scapegoat. And so we read part 1. Part 2 is called The Enigma of Myth Resolved. So the horrible miracle of Apollonius of Tyana is what we talked about. He talks about mythology, sacrifice, the founding murder, powers and principalities. And then part 3 is the victory of the cross, wherein I assume, it's been a long time since I've read part 3, I assume that's where he lays out how the death of Christ ends up undoing the sort of the tool that Satan's got for keeping people in this kind of loop of rivalries getting ballooned up, and then you need some sort of pressure release so that the whole thing doesn't collapse, and then rivalries getting ballooned up, and in so doing, the devil can harvest his souls or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, so that's Rene Girard.
It's interesting stuff. Anyway, I'd be curious to hear the rest of it, but maybe I just need to go pick up the book.
I'm just wondering if we've come to the end of our discussion on it.
maybe we've gotten all like the bummer stuff. I'd be curious for like what the
Sure.
good news.
I'm planning on finishing it. So.
Good. I like it. Any other final comments before we wrap up?
Just that we have Patreon and
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry,
If you
I'm
wanna
the guy
patronize
that
us.
nitpicks at the end of every episode where
I
theory is
did a
presented.
Levitical nitpick, so I feel like that's got to get me some credit.
Yeah.
So.
no, I mean like I can get my head all like wound up about someone's big overarching explaining theology. So I think or explaining mechanisms is always very good to be like, well, but this doesn't always happen. There are mediated discussions. Those are true points that Rene Girard has to grapple with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can find us on Patreon. That's what Graham just said. You can find us patreon.com/classical stuff. You can find us on Twitter at Cliscal Stuff, CLSSCAL Stuff. You can find us on email. You can email us at theguys@classicalstuff.net. If you send us memes, you become our favorite person immediately. So thank you for that. So thank you to people who continue doing that. And
It's not pronounced memes.
when I first read it in whichever Dawkins book it is, that's how I thought it was pronounced.
Memes?
This was in college. I contend this was before memes were a thing, and none of us knew how to pronounce it. I want to say the professor pronounced it that way too. It was evolutionary
Memes?
psychology at UT.
Meme?
Memets.
Because doesn't it literally mean like ideas or something? It's like a Greek word, I think. Anyway, whatever. Okay, good talk, guys. This has been Classical Stuff. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.